Hello, Gemini. Welcome to your end of June reading. Let's take a look at the energies, messages, and guidance coming through for you as we close out the month. So let's dive right in. There's a tremor running through the floor of your life right now that you've been mistaking for anxiety. It isn't anxiety. Anxiety vibrates at a frequency your body knows well, a frequency you've cataloged through years of intimate, unwanted familiarity, a frequency that has a specific address in your nervous system where it checks in every time it visits, and that you've learned to identify the way a person identifies a knock they've heard before. This isn't that knock. This vibration doesn't have an address in your system because it's never visited before. It's new, unregistered, arriving at a door your nervous system didn't know it had, and producing a sensation that your body is processing through the closest available template, which is anxiety, because anxiety is the nearest match in your experiential catalog, even though the match is imprecise. The way a person who has never tasted mango might describe it as kind of like a peach close in the neighborhood, but fundamentally a different fruit. What you're feeling is a different fruit. And the difference, the specific quality that separates this tremor from the anxiety it resembles, is directionality. Anxiety vibrates inward, contracts, pulls your energy toward your center in a protective gathering motion that makes you smaller, denser, more defended. This vibration is doing the opposite. It's pushing outward, expanding, pressing against the walls of your current life with the specific, can feel it in your skin insistence of something that is too large for the container it's been placed in, and that is through the simple physics of pressure differential, seeking a way out. The something isn't metaphorical. It's an actual development, an actual piece of news, an actual material exists in the world of facts and consequences event that has been forming in the architecture of your life's circumstances the way a weather system forms in the atmosphere, through the convergence of conditions that individually seem unrelated but that collectively produce something with a force and a direction that none of the individual conditions could generate alone. The conditions have been converging for a while. In areas of your life that you've been tracking separately, in developments that you've been filing in different mental drawers without noticing that the drawers are connected, that the development in this area of your life is influencing the development in that area, which is feeding back into a third area, which is creating conditions in a fourth that are producing effects you've been attributing to coincidence or to the general ambient chaos of being alive in a complicated world. But the effects aren't coincidence. They're convergence. And the convergence has a vector, a direction, a destination that all the separate developments have been pointing toward from the beginning, without any single development making the destination visible, because the destination only becomes visible when you see all the developments simultaneously. When you stop filing them in separate drawers and lay them on the same table and step back far enough to see the pattern they form when they're adjacent rather than isolated, the pattern is pointing at next week, at a specific, compressed, everything arrives in the same window period where the convergence reaches its culmination point and the separate developments, which have been building in their separate domains at their separate speeds, simultaneously produce their separate results. And the simultaneous production, the all-at-once quality of multiple developments reaching maturity in the same time frame, is what's going to give next week the explosive quality that I need to prepare you for. Because a single piece of news, however strong, can be processed sequentially. The mind receives it, evaluates it, integrates it, moves on to the next thing. But multiple pieces arriving simultaneously overwhelm the sequential processing. They stack, they interact, they compound, And the compounded impact of several strong developments landing in the same short window is qualitatively different from the sum of their individual impacts. It's more not additive, multiplicative, each development amplifying the others. Each piece of news changing the context in which the other pieces are received so that the same piece that would have been significant on its own becomes transformative when received alongside the others. Something about the nature of this news that I think is important to establish early is that the news isn't uniformly good or uniformly bad. It's strong. And strong in the vocabulary of life developments is a category that includes both kinds of intensity. The intensity of something wonderful arriving and the intensity of something difficult being revealed. Both are present in what's approaching. And the bothness is what makes the preparation important, because you're going to need to hold two very different emotional responses simultaneously. The response to the wonderful and the response to the difficult. And the simultaneous holding, the capacity to feel joy and gravity in the same breath, is a skill that most people don't practice, because most of life's developments are polite enough to arrive one at a time and to identify themselves as either or rather than both and. But next week's news isn't polite, it's honest. And honest developments don't sort themselves into comfortable categories. They arrive in their actual form, which is almost always mixed, almost always carrying dimensions that resist the simple filing of this is good or this is bad, almost always requiring the receiver to expand their emotional bandwidth past the either or and into the both and. Let me talk about the wonderful first, because I think starting there gives you a foundation to stand on when the difficult arrives alongside it. Something you've been working toward, something you've been investing in with the patient daily. Nobody sees the effort. Consistency that characterizes the way you pursue things that matter to you is about to produce a result, not a partial result. Not an incremental, one step closer, progress is being made result that you can add to the ledger of effort invested but return not yet received. A full result, the kind that arrives with the particular, unmistakable, the thing actually happened quality that converts effort from an ongoing process into a completed achievement. The conversion is significant because you've been living in the process for so long that the process has become your identity. You're the person who's working toward the thing. The person who hasn't gotten there yet, but who is getting there. And the yet, the not arrived but approaching quality that the in-process status provides, has been serving a function that you might not have identified. It's been protecting you from the specific vulnerability of having arrived. Because arriving means the effort is no longer theoretical. The result is real. And the real result is going to be evaluated by you, by others, by whatever standard the result is measured against. And the evaluation, the exposure of the result to assessment is a vulnerability that the in-process status was shielding you from, because in-process things can't be evaluated. They're not done yet. The yet is the shield, and the shield is about to be removed because the thing is about to be done, and done things don't have a yet to hide behind. The removal of the shield is going to produce a specific moment of naked exposure that I want to prepare you for, because the moment is going to be mistaken by your anxiety template as a threat. The exposure feels dangerous. The assessment feels threatening. The vulnerability of having actually arrived, of standing in the light of a completed thing that can now be seen and measured and responded to by the world, that vulnerability is going to activate every self-protective instinct your system possesses, and the instincts are going to say retreat, say it's not ready, say one more revision, one more delay, one more yet inserted between the completion and the world's encounter with the completed thing. But the yet is no longer available. The result has matured past the point where additional process is possible. It's ripe. And ripe things that aren't harvested don't get better. They spoil. The timing of the result's arrival in the world isn't something you can control at this point. The convergence has its own schedule. And the schedule says next week. And next week, ready or not, assessed or not, shield or no shield, the result enters the light. The light is going to be kinder than you expect. That's the wonderful part. The result, exposed to the assessment you've been dreading, is going to perform in the assessment better than your catastrophic imagination has been projecting. Not because your imagination is pessimistic, because your imagination has been running its projections using the data from the in-process version rather than from the completed version. And the completed version is better than the in-process version. Significantly better. Because the completion, the final stage of the maturation, added something that wasn't available during the in-process period. A quality that can only be described as integration. The separate elements that were visible as separate during the in-process stage have, in the completion, merged into something unified, something whose whole exceeds its parts. Something that, viewed as a whole rather than as a collection of parts still being assembled, has a coherence and a power that the parts in progress could never have suggested. The whole is a surprise. Not because the parts were surprising, because the way the parts combined was unexpected and produced something that you couldn't have designed deliberately. Something that the process itself authored through the specific alchemy of sustained effort, meeting uncontrollable circumstances, meeting the particular, unrepeatable, only available at this exact moment in your development quality that you brought to the work during the period when you thought the work was still in progress and therefore still imperfect and therefore still shielded from the vulnerability of being done. The assessment is going to respond to the whole, not to the parts. And the response is going to be strong, not lukewarm. Not the polite, competent, meets expectations response that your modesty has been preparing you to receive. Strong, the kind of response that comes from people or systems or circumstances encountering something that exceeds the template they were applying to it. The template said this will be fine. The result said this is more than fine. And the more than fine, the exceeding of the template, is going to produce a response from the world that is proportional to the exceeding rather than proportional to the template. And the proportional to the exceeding response is going to be larger than anything your preparation has accounted for, because your preparation was calibrated to the template. And the template has been exceeded. And the exceeded template means your preparation is inadequate, not because you failed to prepare, because you prepared for the expected and the actual is beyond the expected. And beyond the expected, which is the literal meaning of the word extraordinary, is the quality of the response you're about to receive. The response is going to take a specific form that I want to describe, because the form is going to be the delivery mechanism for the news, and recognizing the form is going to help you receive the news at its actual weight, rather than at the reduced weight that your modesty is going to try to apply to it. The form is a communication from a person or an entity whose position relative to you is elevated, not personally elevated, structurally elevated, meaning they occupy a position in whatever hierarchy is relevant to the result you've produced that is above the position you occupy. And the communication from the elevated position directed at you regarding your result is going to carry an authority that communications from peer level positions don't carry. Because authority in hierarchical systems flows downward. And a communication flowing downward from an elevated position to yours isn't casual, it's intentional. It represents a decision on the part of the elevated position to allocate attention to your result. And the allocation of attention from an elevated position is itself a signal. The signal says, this matters enough for me to direct my attention toward it, rather than toward the 1,000 other things competing for the same attention. The attention is the news, or rather, the attention is the wrapper. And inside the wrapper is the specific, concrete, material consequence that the attention produces when it's directed from an elevated position toward a result that has exceeded the template. The consequence is advancement, movement, the opening of a door that has been, until the attention was directed at you, closed, not locked. Closed in the way that doors in hierarchical systems are closed to people who haven't yet produced the result that justifies the opening. The result has been produced. The attention has been directed. The door is opening, and the opening is going to produce effects in the practical dimension of your life, the financial dimension, the social dimension, the range of possibilities dimension that are going to feel when they arrive, like the expansion that the tremor has been foretelling. Because the tremor was the body's early detection of the opening. The body, which receives the energetic dimension of approaching events before the mind receives the informational dimension, has been feeling the door's movement for days, feeling the hinges turning, feeling the change in pressure that an opening door produces in the room on the other side. That's what the tremor is, not anxiety, anticipation at a frequency your body doesn't have a name for yet. Now I need to talk about the difficult part, because the wonderful part, significant as it is, doesn't arrive alone. It arrives alongside something else. Something that shares the same compressed window, but that occupies a very different emotional territory. And the something else involves a truth being revealed about a situation that you thought you understood. A situation involving people whose roles in your life have been defined by an understanding that is about to be shown through the mechanism of information reaching you that has been previously unavailable, as incomplete, not wrong exactly. Incomplete in the way that a map is incomplete when it shows the roads but not the terrain. You've been navigating by the roads, and the roads have been accurate as far as they go. But the terrain, the actual landscape that the roads are built on, has features that the road map didn't include. And the features, once revealed, change the meaning of the roads. Change where the roads are actually leading, despite appearing to lead where the map suggested. The information that reveals the terrain is going to arrive through a channel that you weren't monitoring. Not because you were negligent, because the channel wasn't one you had reason to monitor. It's a channel that connects to the situation through a pathway you didn't know existed, a person who knows something, a document that surfaces, a conversation overheard or reported or reconstructed from fragments that individually meant nothing but that collectively, assembled in the right order, produce a picture so clear and so different from the picture you've been carrying that the discrepancy between the two is going to produce a physical response, a dropping sensation. The specific felt in the stomach ground just shifted beneath me quality of discovering that the map you've been using doesn't match the territory you've been walking through. The map territory discrepancy is going to be uncomfortable, not devastating. I want to be clear about that distinction because your catastrophic imagination, the same one that was underestimating the wonderful, is going to overestimate the difficult. The difficult isn't devastating. It's clarifying. It takes a situation that has been producing a low-level confusion, a persistent, can't quite place it sense that something in the situation doesn't add up, and it resolves the confusion by providing the information that was missing from the addition. The addition now adds up. The numbers make sense. And the making sense, while it produces the discomfort of discovering that the previous not making sense was caused by missing information rather than by the inherent complexity of the situation, the making sense also produces relief. The specific, my body was right relief of discovering that the confusion you've been feeling wasn't your failure to understand a complex situation. It was your accurate detection of a simple situation that was being presented as complex by the absence of information that would have made it simple if you'd had it. The simplicity that the information reveals is going to rearrange your understanding of certain people's behavior, not their character. Their behavior, the things they did or said or didn't do or didn't say that seemed, through the lens of the incomplete map, to be motivated by one thing and that are going to be revealed through the lens of the complete map to have been motivated by something else. And the something else is going to be simultaneously more understandable and more disappointing than what you'd been assuming. More understandable because the actual motivation, once visible, has a logic that the assumed motivation lacked. The behavior makes sense now. The inconsistencies resolve. The things that didn't add up, add up. More disappointing because the actual motivation is less generous than what you'd been giving these people credit for. Not malicious, less generous. They were operating from a more self-interested position than the incomplete map suggested, and the self-interest, while human and while understandable, and while not in any absolute sense condemnable, is different from the motivation you'd attributed to them. And the different from the gap between what you assumed was driving their behavior and what was actually driving it is going to produce a recalibration of trust that isn't dramatic, but that is real. A slight adjustment in how much of yourself you extend in those specific directions, a slight reconfiguration of the expectations you bring to those specific interactions, not a wall, an update. The kind of update that a system produces when it receives new data that changes the risk assessment for a specific category of engagement without changing the system's overall willingness to engage. The wonderful and the difficult are going to arrive in the same compressed window, and the compression is what's going to make the experience feel explosive rather than sequential. Because if the door opening and the map completion arrived separately, weeks apart, each would be processed in its own time with its own emotional allocation, and neither would feel overwhelming because the processing capacity would be available for each in full. But the same window arrival means the processing capacity has to be shared, has to accommodate the expansion of the wonderful while simultaneously accommodating the recalibration of the difficult. And the accommodation of both simultaneously is going to produce the both and that I described earlier. The feeling of joy and gravity occupying the same breath. The experience of celebrating a door opening while adjusting to the discovery that certain walls aren't positioned where you thought they were. The two experiences layered on top of each other, interacting with each other, each one changing the quality of the other through their proximity, are going to produce a emotional state that is complex in a way that your system has rarely been asked to hold, but your system can hold it. That's the part I want to emphasize, because the preparation isn't about bracing. The preparation is about expanding, not your capacity, which is already sufficient. Your willingness to use the capacity, because the capacity exists. You've been through things that were more intense than what's approaching, and you survived them, and the surviving built the infrastructure that can hold what next week is bringing. The capacity isn't in question. The willingness is, because the willingness requires you to consent to complexity, to say yes to a experience that isn't clean, isn't simple, isn't fileable under a single emotional label. To accept that the week's events are going to produce a state that is both celebratory and sobering, both expanding and clarifying, both wonderfully beyond your expectations and disappointingly below your assumptions, and that the bothness is not a problem to be resolved, but a reality to be inhabited. Inhabited the way you inhabit a landscape that has both mountains and valleys. The mountains don't cancel the valleys. The valleys don't diminish the mountains. Both exist. Both are real. Both are part of the same territory. And the territory, viewed as a whole rather than as a collection of separate features to be evaluated individually, is richer than either the mountains or the valleys alone could produce. Something about the specific timing of next week that carries information beyond the general convergence is that the timing itself has a quality of orchestration that I want to name, because naming it is going to help you recognize the orchestration as it unfolds rather than experiencing it as chaos. The developments aren't arriving in random order. They're arriving in a sequence that has an internal logic. The logic is this: the wonderful arrives first, before the difficult, not because the wonderful is more important, because the wonderful produces a state of expansion that provides the emotional platform from which the difficult can be received without the difficult producing contraction. Think of it as altitude. The wonderful elevates you, raises your emotional altitude to a height where the difficult, when it arrives, can be seen from above rather than from ground level. And seen from above, the difficult is smaller, not because it's less real, because the vantage point is higher, and a higher vantage point makes things look proportional rather than overwhelming. Makes them look like features of a landscape rather than walls blocking a path. The wonderful, by arriving first and elevating your state, is providing the altitude from which the difficult can be navigated without the difficult producing the spiral that it would produce if it arrived first. Before the elevation, when you were standing at ground level and the difficult's full, unmitigated, no altitude for perspective weight would have landed on a system that had no elevation to absorb the impact. The sequencing is the orchestration. The wonderful first, then the difficult. The elevation first, then the challenge. The expansion first, then the clarification. The ordering isn't accidental. It's the way the convergence is structured. The way the separate developments, which have been building at their separate speeds in their separate domains, happen to reach their separate maturation points in an order that serves the receiver rather than overwhelming them. And the serving, the benevolent ordering that provides altitude before challenge, is one of those features of the universe's design that a person could easily miss if they weren't paying attention, and that, if noticed, produces a gratitude so specific that it doesn't feel like generic spiritual thankfulness, but like the precise, personal, someone thought about. This recognition of a design that accounts for the specific human who is going to be living through it. The design accounts for you specifically, not in the grandiose, the universe revolves around me sense. In the practical, the ordering of these events reflects an intelligence that is aware of my specific capacity and that has arranged the events according. Lie sense. The wonderful first because you need the altitude. The difficult second because the altitude provides the perspective, the both together, because the togetherness produces a complexity that your system is ready for, and that the system's encounter with the complexity is going to build a capability that the system didn't have before the encounter. And that is going to be needed for what comes after the week. Because next week isn't a destination, it's a threshold. A crossing over point between the phase of your life that preceded the convergence and the phase that follows it. And the phase that follows requires capabilities that the phase that preceded didn't demand. Capabilities that the both and of next week's experience is going to develop in you through the specific, can't be acquired any other way mechanism of actually living through something complex and discovering in the living through that you can hold more than the previous phase asked you to hold. I want to talk about what comes after the week, because the after is where the news's impact becomes visible and where the explosive quality transitions from a moment into a trajectory. The door that opens, the assessment that exceeds the template, the attention from the elevated position, all of that produces not just a moment of recognition, but a change in the velocity of your life. The velocity has been constant, maybe for a long time. The pace at which things develop, opportunities arrive, relationships deepen, circumstances evolve, that pace has been operating at a speed that you've accepted as your speed, as the rate at which your life processes. And the rate felt natural because the rate was consistent, and consistent things feel like nature rather than like limitation. But the rate was a limitation, imposed not by your capacity, but by the position you occupied in the hierarchy of whatever system the result is being assessed within. The position had a speed associated with it. The speed of a person at that level, and the level determined the rate of development the way a river's grade determines the rate of flow. You were flowing at the rate your grade permitted, and the rate was fine, was functional, was producing progress at a pace that seemed, from inside the flow, like the natural pace of progress. The door opening changes the grade, tilts the terrain, and the tilted terrain produces a different rate of flow that is going to feel in the first days and weeks after the tilting, like acceleration. Not because you're trying harder, because the resistance has been reduced. Because the position you now occupy, the position that the door opening provides access to, has a different relationship with the forces that impede or assist forward motion. The forces that were impeding at the previous level are neutral at the new level. The forces that were neutral are assisting. And the shift from impediment to neutrality and from neutrality to assistance produces an acceleration that is going to be one of the most disorienting and exciting features of the post-week period. The acceleration is going to produce things, tangible things, opportunities that arrive at a frequency that your previous pace wouldn't have generated. Connections with people who operate at the velocity of the new level and whose velocity matched with yours produces collaborations and exchanges that have a pace and a quality that your previous pace's slower speed couldn't access. Financial developments that reflect the new position's different relationship with the flow of resources. The resources don't increase because you worked harder. They increase because the position's changed grade allows a greater volume of flow through the same channel. Same channel, different grade, more flow. That's the mechanism. And the mechanism, which has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with position, is going to produce the practical, material, can see it in your account effects that are going to be among the most immediately impactful consequences of next week's news. Something about the difficult part of the news that I haven't addressed yet and that I think needs attention is what to do with the recalibrated trust. Because the recalibration, the slight adjustment in how you relate to certain people based on the new information about their actual motivations, is going to produce a period of uncertainty in those specific relationships. Not crisis. Uncertainty. The specific, I'm not sure what to do with this quality of being in a relationship whose terms have changed without the other person knowing the terms have changed, because the information that changed the terms on your end hasn't been shared with them, and the sharing isn't required, and the not sharing produces an asymmetry of awareness that feels uncomfortable because you're now operating on a different map than they are. And the different map means the same interactions are being experienced differently by each of you, and the differently experienced interactions are generating a subtle, growing, increasingly difficult to ignore misalignment that is going to need to be addressed eventually, even though the addressing can wait until the week's other developments have been processed and the altitude has stabilized and the both and has been integrated into something more settled than the initial impact's complexity. Here at Mary's Angel Tarot, the developments I encountered that carried this quality of mixed news, wonderful and difficult, arriving in the same window, are always the ones that produce the most growth per unit of experience, because the mixed quality prevents the comfortable response, prevents the simple filing, prevents the this is good or this is bad categorization that allows a person to process an event through a single emotional channel and then move on. The mixed quality forces dual channel processing, forces the system to hold two states simultaneously. And the simultaneous holding, while it's uncomfortable, while it produces the strange, slightly seasick feeling of emotional states that don't usually coexist, trying to share the same body at the same time, the holding develops something that single channel processing doesn't develop. Resilience, not the endurance kind, the flexibility kind, the kind that allows a person to navigate complexity without needing the complexity to resolve into simplicity before they can function. The kind that says, I can feel two things at once and I can hold the two things without one of them erasing the other, and I can make decisions from the both and rather than waiting for the both and to become an either or. That flexibility is the capability I mentioned earlier, the one that the phase following the week is going to require. The one that the week's experience is designed through the specific both and structure of its events to develop in you so that you're equipped for a subsequent phase that is going to be characterized by a complexity that the previous phase's simpler either or structure didn't prepare you for. The subsequent phase is why the preparation matters. Not next week itself, the phase that next week inaugurates. The phase where the velocity is higher and the opportunities are more numerous and the relationships operate at a depth that the previous phase's shallower waters didn't demand, and the financial reality includes resources require management skills the previous realities smaller resources didn't require. All of that, the higher, the more, the deeper, the larger is coming. Not eventually as a direct, traceable, caused by next week's developments consequence that begins to manifest in the days and weeks following the news. And the manifesting is going to require you to be someone slightly larger than you currently are. Not dramatically larger, slightly. The one size up that the Wonderful's door opening provides access to, and that the Difficult's trust recalibration prepares you for by teaching you through direct experience that the world you're entering is one where motivations are mixed and people are complex, and the map is never complete. And the ability to navigate with incomplete maps is not a limitation, but a skill. The most important skill, actually, for the level you're moving to. Because the level you're moving to doesn't have complete maps. It has more territory, more complexity, more dimensions of interaction that require the flexibility to hold both and rather than either or. And the flexibility developed through next week's mixed experience is going to be the tool you use to navigate the expanded territory with the competence that the expanded territory demands. Something about the specific quality of the strong news that I want to address before I close is the word strong itself. Because strong, in the context of news, usually gets interpreted as either very good or very bad. But strong, as I'm using it, means something different. Strong means impactful, means life-altering, means the kind of news that, regardless of its emotional valence, changes what's possible, changes what's available, changes the set of options that a person's life presents to them when they wake up in the morning and face the question of what to do with the day. Strong news changes the option set, adds options that weren't there before, removes options that were, reshuffles the order of priority that the existing options occupy. And the reshuffling, the adding and removing and reordering is what makes the news feel explosive. Because an explosion is what happens when a contained system suddenly has its containment removed and the contents previously held in a specific configuration by the containment's pressure are free to rearrange themselves according to their own nature rather than according to the containment's structure. Your option set has been contained, held in a specific configuration by the specific circumstances of the pre-next week phase of your life. The circumstances limited what was available, not cruelly. Structurally, the way a channel limits the water that flows through it. The water can only go where the channel goes. The water can only reach the places the channel reaches. And the channel, while it was adequate for the volume of water the previous phase was producing, is about to be inadequate for the increased volume that the door opening and the velocity change are going to produce. The increased volume is going to exceed the channel's capacity, and the exceeding is going to produce the overflow that finds new paths, reaches new places, accesses new territories that the previous channel didn't connect to. The overflow isn't a problem. It's the mechanism by which the expanded territory becomes available. The mechanism by which the options that weren't in the previous set enter the new set. The mechanism by which the life that exists on the other side of next week's news becomes accessible to the person standing on this side, looking at a channel that is about to be exceeded by a volume it was never designed to carry. I want to talk about one more dimension of next week's events that I think is the most personally significant and that might be obscured by the more dramatic elements of the wonderful and the difficult. There's a relationship dimension, not involving the people whose motivations are about to be clarified, involving someone else. Someone whose role in the convergence has been invisible until now because their role is connecting rather than producing. They're not producing any of the developments, they're connecting them. Functioning as the node through which separately developing situations communicate with each other and produce the convergence that makes the simultaneous arrival possible. This person has been operating in the background of your life in a way that you've been taking for granted, not dismissively the way a person takes gravity for granted, as a constant, as a given, as a feature of the environment that is so reliable, so consistently present, so quietly functional that its significance is invisible through ubiquity. The news is going to reveal this person's significance not directly, through the specific, traceable, follow the thread backward mechanism of looking at the convergence after it has produced its effects and tracing the threads back to their origin points and discovering that an improbable number of the threads pass through this person, that the developments in the separate domains, the ones you've been filing in separate drawers, are connected through this person's involvement, that their quiet, consistent, taken for granted presence in your life has been functioning as the infrastructure through which the separate developments were able to converge rather than remaining separate. The person is the convergence's architect, not deliberately, not through conscious planning, through the natural function of being who they are, positioned where they are, connected to what they're connected to. Their role was structural, load-bearing, and you didn't know the load was there because the bearing was so reliable that the load's weight was invisible. The revelation of this person's structural role is going to produce a gratitude that is specific, targeted, and overwhelming in a way that general gratitude isn't, because general gratitude is diffuse, aimed at everything, held lightly because it's distributed broadly. But specific gratitude, the kind that arrives when you realize that a particular person has been carrying a particular load that made a particular outcome possible, that kind concentrates all the gratitude's force on a single point. And the concentrated force directed at this person is going to change your relationship with them. Not dramatically, in the way that seeing a foundation changes your relationship with the building it supports. You look at the building differently, walk through it differently, inhabit it with a different quality of attention, because the attention now includes awareness of what's underneath, what's holding it up, what would be absent if the foundation weren't there. Let the gratitude land on this person, not in a grand gesture, in the specific, quiet, I see what you've been doing. Acknowledgement that a person gives when they've discovered something they should have noticed sooner. And the not noticing sooner carries a quality of regret that is itself a form of respect. The regret that says, I should have seen this, you deserve to have it seen. And the seeing, however delayed, is arriving now with a force that the timeliness wouldn't have carried, because the delay, by allowing the convergence to complete and the significance to become visible in its full scope, has made the seeing deeper than it would have been if it had arrived earlier, before the full scope was available. The week is approaching, the convergence is maturing, the tremor is not anxiety. The strong news is strong because the life it's arriving in has been preparing for it through every quiet, consistent, nobody sees the effort day that you've been living with the particular underappreciated, deserves more credit than it gets discipline of a person who shows up fully even when the showing up seems to produce nothing, because the nothing is actually building something, and the something is about to become visible. And the visible is going to change everything. Not everything at once, everything in sequence. The wonderful first, then the difficult, then the integration, then the velocity, then the expanded territory, then the gratitude, then the phase that follows. Each one building on the one before it. Each one requiring the one before it in order to land correctly. Each one, in retrospect, occupying the exact position in the sequence that produces the maximum growth with the minimum destruction. The sequence isn't kind in the comfortable sense. It's kind in the structural sense. In the this is the order that produces the best outcome for this specific person sense, that the universe's intelligence applies to the lives it's attending to when the lives have reached the specific, convergence-ready, door-opening, imminent stage that yours has reached. You've reached it. The stage is here. The week is approaching. And the news, strong and mixed and explosive and clarifying and wonderful and difficult and both and rather than either or, is going to arrive in a life that is ready for it, even though the person living the life doesn't feel ready. Because readiness and feeling ready are two different things, and the feeling is always behind the reality, and the reality in your case is that you've been ready for longer than the tremor has been tremoring. The tremor is just the body's way of saying incoming. And the body, which has been ready since before the mind caught up, is going to handle the arrival with the specific competence that bodies bring to events that minds overthink. The body doesn't catastrophize. The body doesn't modesty reduce. The body just receives, processes, integrates, and continues. With the quiet, unperformative, gets no credit, but does all the work reliability of a system that was designed for exactly this. For the strong, for the explosive, for the both and, for the life that is about to change because the convergence reached its culmination, and the culmination broke the surface, and the surface, which has been holding everything in its pre-convergence configuration, gave way to the truth of what has been building underneath. The truth is emerging next week in a form that is going to exceed every template your preparation has been using, in a sequence that is going to serve you better than any sequence you could have designed. In a combination of wonderful and difficult, that is going to produce a complexity your system can hold, because the holding is what your system was built for. And in the aftermath, in the settled, post-explosive, new velocity, expanded territory, specifically grateful, capability expanded aftermath, the life you're going to be living is going to bear only a passing resemblance to the life you're living now. Not because the life is different, because you are enlarged by the weak, equipped by the both and, standing at an altitude that the wonderful provided, and navigating with a clarity that the difficult produced, and moving at a velocity that the door opening made possible, and carrying a gratitude that the structural person's role revealed, and holding all of it simultaneously with the specific, developed through the experience, didn't have it before the week flexibility that is going to be the week's most lasting and most valuable gift. The gift isn't the news. The gift is what the news makes you capable of holding. And the capable of, expanded by the experience, tested by the complexity, confirmed by the surviving, is going to be the foundation for everything that follows. Everything that the post-week phase brings, everything that the new velocity produces, everything that the expanded territory contains. All of it. Built on the foundation of a week that asked you to hold more than you thought you could and that you held. Not perfectly, not without the tremor, not without the moments of mistaking the expansion for anxiety and the clarification for devastation and the both and for a chaos that was actually a composition, but held, despite the imperfection, through the tremor, with the body leading and the mind catching up and the both and teaching the flexibility that the both and was designed to teach. Prepare, not by bracing, by breathing, by reminding the body that the tremor is expansion and the expansion is good news even when the good news is mixed with difficult news, and the mixed is the most honest and the most growthful and the most true to the actual texture of a real human life form that news can take. Next week. Strong, mixed, explosive. And exactly, precisely, with the specific, orchestrated, sequenced for your benefit ordering of a convergence that was always going to arrive at this moment, because this moment is when you're ready for it, exactly what your life has been building toward. The building is complete, the news is the ribbon cutting, and the life on the other side of the ribbon is the one your tremor has been trying to tell you about. Listen to the tremor. It's not anxiety, it's applause from a future that can already see you standing in it. All right. Thank you so much for watching Mary's Angel Tarot. Take care of your energy, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye.